Well, the first thing I'd like to talk about is another celebration that happens at this time, a Mexican tradition of Day of the Dead. I'd like to begin by reading a poem entitled Message in Colors by the Spanish poet Julia Sobotran. And it's a kind of impressionistic and sensory fashion. She tries to convey to us the kind of nostalgia that is the spiritual celebration of the Day of the Dead in Mexico. Lit candles, faces, memories, and an entrance that is a rainbow. Protection for the place of rest and meditation. Necklaces, marigolds, pre-Hispanic cadence, songs, paper medals, flames talking to the wind, the diverse language of the departed. It is the prime time of the celebration, or death's thread threaded through time's needle. It is the decomposition of matter transformed into art. It is the final curtain awoken from death. Yes, an eternal dream of uncorrupt flowers and of celebration. It is death's lament fading away. And it's also the respect made as tribute. Who could have imagined so much beauty in a tomb? Mole, glass of water, incense, salt, prayers, firecrackers, fruits, bread, music, ballads, poems, romantic songs. History praised, creativity expressed in its most raw form, and there are laments in purple, white, blue, and pink. It is a blow from grace so heightened as artificial fire that reveals the soul's presence in the darkness. Something like the flowering of martyrdom in flames, an arrangement of the dead or the posthumous splendor of what one thinks is on the other side. In that place, everything is possible. Grief battles with life, and life wins. It is once again, for a little while, happiness, playful tradition, which overcomes reality. It was before these ornate gravesides when I knew that in that place, as in my heart, those that have departed return every year to remind us of their love, and that only love can save us. Those are the words of the Spanish poet Julia Sobotran. And the Mexican holiday of Day of the Dead is one tradition at this time that honors and celebrates those who have passed. And when I first came to the States many years ago and encountered the Day of the Dead celebrations, I kind of naively thought it was just the Mexican version of Halloween. The proliferation of skeletons in various poses and sugar skulls seemed to suggest a similar emphasis on the fearful, on otherworldly aspects of Halloween. My assumption of any similarity to Halloween was mistaken. Day of the Dead focuses on bringing family and friends together to remember and honor those close to us who have passed. In the poem I just read, we heard about the atmosphere and celebratory nature of the Day of the Dead tradition as families gather at gravesites or in homes with altars, and the altars contain mementos of the person who's passed, and other objects such as flowers, food, and drink. The food and drinks often the favorite dishes of those who have passed, encouraging their spirit to come closer and join them, the family. And the intent is to encourage these visits from the souls of the dead so that they can hear prayers and music and stories told in their honor. The commemoration of the dead has a warm and pleasant overtones for the participants. And in the words from the poem, grief battles with life and life wins. It is once again, for a little while, happiness and playful tradition which overcomes reality. And that reality is death. But for a brief period through community celebration, then grief can be transcended. And this festive interaction between the living and the dead in a social ritual helps the living to remember how enriched they were by the lives of those no longer with them. 3 months into the first ministry that I served, someone left, and I asked him why he left, and he said we were becoming, as a Unitarian Universalist community, too spiritual. So the board was really concerned, so they contacted me and asked what did I think of that. And I said, that's a great reason for someone to leave a religious community. Because we Unitarian Universalists don't always get accused of being too spiritual. And so I met with the person and asked them, what is it? Why do you think we're becoming too spiritual? He said, every time you use the word spiritual, I think of ghosts. And I said, you really think that's what I mean when I talk about it? And I'll show you what a ghost is. Can we see the slide now? I know what ghosts are. Ghosts are people who die trying to fold fitted sheets. And I could be one of those people. Thank you, Liz. But I think we often approach, things like death, through things like ghosts and monsters, because we kind of want to keep it at a distance, and we often use humor to kind of attach it. And you look at Halloween, how we kind of approach death in a kind of slightly obtuse and kind of tangential way. There's lots of great jokes about death, and I always like the one about the court jester. Court jesters always tell the truth to power, to the kings. And eventually this court jester eventually offends the king, and the king says, okay, I'm going to sentence you to death, but since you've been a servant for so long, I'll give you the option of how would you like to die. And the court jester said, I'd like to die of old age. One of my great hopes is what I hear at my funeral is, look, he's moving. So there's lots of humor to avoid, facing death. But at this time of year, is this time between the line between, the living and the dead is supposed to be thinner. And Halloween is a kind of fairly strange tradition, as we're demonstrating today, with people of all ages creatively expressing themselves and engaging in this realm of make-believe and fantasy through costumes and trick-or-treating, or these cathartic, scary traditions. And I found trick-or-treating really bizarre when I first came to the States, because when I grew up in Scotland, it was called guising. It wasn't called trick-or-treating, it was guising, which was short for disguising, because that was too long a word for most people in Glasgow. And the thing was, we'd go about doors, and you didn't do trick-or-treat. You had to tell a joke, sing a song, or tell a story. It was those type of activities, and it was really for children as well. You'll be thankful to know I did not sing a song. I usually told a joke. You'll be surprised to hear. But that was the kind of tradition there. And then I remember the first time in the States at Halloween, I went into the bank and I got served by a pregnant nun. It was the strangest experience. That was the first and last time I got served by a pregnant nun. But there's other traditions as well. In the pagan tradition, there's Samhain. And it's a popular festival of the dead. And it's amongst various pagan groups throughout the world. And Samhain means summer's end, and it's generally a celebration of the end of the harvest time. And it's honouring the time of life, death, and rebirth. And it's often think in the pagan tradition at the beginning of the new spiritual year. And Samhain also has these ancient spiritual practices of remembering and paying respect to the dead. And of course, Christianity tried to absorb these into the traditional Christian holidays of All Saints' Days and All Souls' Days. And that's why it happens at this time of year, November 1st, November 2nd. It was moved. But many indigenous cultures throughout the world had these traditions, like Day of the Dead in the Mexican culture. But Samhain is a serious religious practice of honouring the dead, but it's not fearful of the dead like we are in here through Halloween. I think it's a huge difference between Halloween and Samhain and Day of the Dead, because in Samhain and Day of the Dead, they're not scared of the dead. Whereas Halloween, one of the reasons we kind of dressed up in costumes or disguised ourselves was to hide from those dead spirits or to scare them off. That's why we dress in as monsters and ghosts and witches. And I want to say now, I think witches get a really bad rap. Not only do they travel with fossil-free fueling, they also, they were often the medicine women, and were often single women in the cultures, and there was all the patriarchy and cultural oppression of witches that experienced throughout both North America and Europe. So I love that Room in the Broom, that the witch is really portrayed positively there. She's inviting everyone to ride in a broom until it broke. I think there's such differences of approaches, like why is our culture so scared of the dead and doesn't talk about it, whereas these cultures celebrate and try and bring those memories closer. And I think religious communities can do a lot to kind of demystify that idea of death. And the Day of the Dead is a celebration, and its roots back hundreds and hundreds of years with indigenous cultures. But the groups have been persecuted, and they really kind of were forced to move it into like the All Souls Day by the early Catholic missionaries. And you have to realize that the Spanish, like most of Europe, when they first came to the United States, they had just come out of the Great Plagues of the 13th, 14th, and 15th century, where a third of the population died, so they were really scared of death. And so when they came and saw these traditions, wanting to bring these spirits back, there was a lot of fear, and I'm not justifying what they did, but I want to think it's important to get some understanding of how these cataclysmic events can affect our culture. Because it's complex, and you wonder with the pandemic that we're going through now, how's that going to impact us culturally? And I think a lot of us have struggled to re-engage socially after the pandemic, because these have a profound impact when it affects the whole culture. And one of the things they do with the Day of the Dead celebration is they have these skeletons and sugar skulls, and they are material symbolism for the person that's lost. And the skeletons, you often see them playing guitar or dancing or drumming or reading, and those are they're often conveying what those people loved to do when they were alive. If they were a musician, if they were a reader, if they were a dancer, they're trying to kind of basically have this materialistic symbolism. And I think we all, when we've lost people, have these keepsakes that are very important to us. This tie was given to me by my dad when I was 22 at my brother's wedding. And it was his tie. But he gave it to me for my brother's wedding, and so when I have this tie, I always think of my father, who died in 2008. I think if we all think about it, we all have these physical connections that really bring that spirit closer to us. And we kind of do it in an individualistic way, whereas the Day of the Dead are trying to do it in a more communal, a more family way. And I invite you to think about what physical connections do you have to those who have passed, or perhaps those who are just further away in your life in a foreign country, or you just don't see as often as you'd like. And think of the significance, the spiritual significance of that physical connection to someone. Because I think religion at its best, like costumes and humour and playfulness, allow us to approach these difficult subjects, these scary subjects, such as death and uncertainty. And hopefully it can help us find courage to explore those uncertainties, face our fears, and overcome the challenges we have to really touch into those deep, sad, dark places within us.
Thanks. First, I want to let you all know that what I'm about to share with you has two distinct parts. A sad part, a very sad part, and a much lighter part, which I hope will make you laugh. In my work, I encounter death fairly often. I am a veterinarian at Pets in Need, an animal shelter that also provides some low-cost veterinary services to the public, including euthanasia. Aluche, was an 11-year-old miniature poodle whose owners brought him in for euthanasia this past week. They had recently taken him to an emergency vet hospital because he was weak, wasn't eating, and was rapidly losing weight. They were told that he had stomach cancer and that his prognosis was grave. They decided to take him home so he could have a bit more time with them. But this past week, he looked to be in more pain, and they believed that his time had come. While nothing could be done to treat his stomach cancer, they wanted to help Aluche by putting an end to his pain and letting him rest in peace. It takes courage and extraordinary generosity of spirit to make that decision. I was honored to be able to help them give Aluche that gift of a gentle, quick, and painless death. A family of 3 came in with Aluche, his parents, I'll call them Diego and Rosa, and Aluche's canine brother that he'd lived with his whole life, named Max. Diego and Rosa showed continued courage and generosity in their willingness to stay with Aluche during his final moments, rather than leave him in the company of strangers. The family had never witnessed euthanasia of a pet before, so I carefully explained the process as gently as I could. My assistant Jamie and I first gave Aluche a sedative, and Max sniffed him and wagged his tail, while Aluche slowly nodded off in Diego's arms. Then Jamie held off a vein while I gave the euthanasia injection, an overdose of anesthetic that first causes a complete loss of consciousness and then stops the animal's breathing and heartbeat. After I gave the injection, I placed my stethoscope on Aluche's chest and listened to his heart. I heard it still beating faintly, then slow down, and finally stop. I took the stethoscope out of my ears and quietly said to Diego and Rosa, "He's gone." Those words are often the hardest part for pet owners, and both Diego and Rosa broke down into sobs as they leaned over Aluche's motionless body. I felt my throat tighten and tears well up as I told them they could take as much time as they needed and excused Jamie and myself from the room. I have been in their position when my last dog, Ursa, was euthanized 12 years ago, also for stomach cancer. I also broke down in uncontrollable sobs, and leaving her lifeless body, knowing I would never see her beautiful, furry self again, was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. As a veterinarian, I've also been in this same position many times before. It is always sad, but it's part of my job, and I needed to continue my day's work while giving Aluche's family time and space to say their final goodbyes. And that's the end of the sad part. So, my first task was to complete a medical record for the euthanasia procedure. As a nonprofit, Pets in Need relies on really antiquated and clunky software for our electronic medical records. The software, called Chameleon, was created in 1984. We're using version 45, released in 2018, rather than the latest version, 46. Maybe that's why it's so bad. Most actions in the program require the use of function keys, and new users typically have to tape a legend along the top of their keyboard to remind them what each function key does until they memorize them. Different windows or screens, such as the animal window, include many labeled text boxes or fields that can be filled in either by typing, and the type must be in all caps, or by using F4 to display a list of choices. The F8 key saves your entries, but always prompts this message: are you absolutely, positively, unequivocally sure the record will be updated? Chameleon software definitely doesn't have online help, a mobile version, or dark mode. One part of completing the medical record for the euthanasia procedure was to indicate in the software that Aluce was now deceased. Unfortunately, both my assistant Jamie and I were unsure about where to enter this information. There were two fields on the animal screen labeled condition and status that seemed to be likely candidates. I typed in deceased, in all caps, of course, and into the first field and hit F8 to save. After asking me if I was absolutely, positively, unequivocally sure, Chameleon then displayed a message that deceased was an invalid value. So I hit F4 to display the choices for each box, and I saw that dead was a choice for both fields. Which of the fields should I use? I asked Jamie, but she didn't know. After a few more moments of indecision, I told Jamie that in order to ensure the information was correctly entered, I selected dead for both fields. I hit F8 to save, confirmed again that I was absolutely, positively, unequivocally sure, and then heard Jamie's deadpan response, which was, yes, because that dog isn't just dead, it's dead, dead. And I burst out laughing. Were Jamie and I horrible for laughing while Aluce's family was sobbing with grief in the next room? I don't think so. Humor is both a defense mechanism in times of crisis and a tool for coping long after the event. Jamie and I can't become overwhelmed with sadness after every death. We need moments of levity so that we can continue to be available to the next animal or family that needs us. And this applies to anyone dealing with death. I'd like to end with a quote from American science fiction screenwriter and novelist David Gerald. He says, "Life is hard, then you die. Then they throw dirt in your face. Then the worms eat you. Be grateful if it happens in that order."